Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll join Senator Leahy in objecting to having two circuit court nominees before us at the same time. While I appreciate the opportunity we've had for the exchange, as you can see, it narrows our ability and our time to explore the views and backgrounds of two gentlemen nominated to one of the most important courts in our country. So it's my hope we won't make this a consistent practice going forward. Justice Willett, I'm just going to close on this point about which we've gone back and forth about this memo. I appreciate your sharing the challenges your mother faced when you were a child, and I appreciate your saying that this was nothing more than an attempt to follow the guidelines of the governor's office. But I'll read the sentence that immediately follows the sentence just read by my colleague from Texas. I strongly resist anything that shows we believe the hype. And that's what I struggled with, was the suggestion implicit in that language that advocating around concerns about sexual discrimination and harassment is merely hype. Let me move forward, if I might, Justice Willett. You wrote an article for the Texas Public Policy Foundation in which you criticized the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals for being pro-defendant. And you stated, I believe I'm quoting here, that increased rates of fatherless, godless, and jobless children created a bomb that promised to explode into, quote, an army of hardened, stone-cold kids who are rooted in abject moral poverty, children who hold absolutely no regard for human life, vacant children who rob and rape and maim and murder, often in gangs on raw impulse alone, quote. Having heard the ferocity of that level of concern about juvenile justice and the alleged moral poverty of those who end up in the criminal justice system or before courts, do you still believe there's an army of juvenile offenders whose offenses are rooted in abject moral poverty? And should the justice system do more, Justice, to rehabilitate these juvenile offenders?
Senator Coons, thank you for that. As you noted at the outset, that was written 20 plus years ago. In my capacity, I was a private lawyer then. I was doing some occasional policy writing for a nonprofit think tank. And that was written in my capacity as a policy commentator.
Well, I appreciate you putting it in that context. You currently serve as a justice. As you've explained in some exchanges with Senator Leahy, you've got time for Twitter. Do you have time for juvenile justice reform in your current role? Could you help me understand today how you act in a way that either extends or changes from the direction that might have been suggested by this dated article?
Senator, in my current role, of course, as a justice on the Texas Supreme Court, we're always in receiving mode. We have no control. We can't manufacture or engineer what lands on our doorstep. Texas is unique in America. We have a bifurcated high court system. The Texas Supreme Court, despite the title, is supreme on civil matters alone. All criminal matters go to our sister higher court, our constitutional twin, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. So my court is a civil-only court, so we don't have day-to-day involvement in criminal matters.
Well, Justice, let me move to Mr. Ho, since I have only a minute and a half left. That's my opening concern. But I'll simply comment. There are differences between states, but the Supreme Court Chief Justice in Delaware, although most of his docket is not criminal, has engaged himself very actively in trying to move forward juvenile justice reform in Delaware, and Senator Cornyn has been quite active in this chamber in advocating for juvenile justice reform. If we get a second round, I'd welcome hearing what you might have done in your private bar time or as a justice, even though the limited jurisdiction before you doesn't directly affect it. Mr. Ho, if I might, you co-authored a brief in re Marriage of JB and HB, a case that concerned whether Texas had the authority to grant same-sex couples a divorce, despite the fact Texas at the time prohibited same-sex marriage. The brief you authored asserts marriage is unique because it encourages procreation and long-term stable parental relationships. This suggests a presumption that gay couples are less likely or less able to be long-term stable parents. Is that your view, sir?
Senator, thank you for the question. If I may put that brief in context, it is my job, and was my job as Solicitor General of Texas, to dutifully and zealously represent the people of Texas.
I understand the role of Solicitor General.
Thank you, Senator. And what's unique about that case, that wasn't just legislation passed by the legislators. It was actually a constitutional amendment voted on by the people. And so it was my duty to do the best job that I could to defend.
Yet, as a zealous advocate, you choose which arguments to advance. And what I was pointing out here was that that argument, which you chose, suggests a certain view of the capability of same-sex couples in terms of whether they could or could not be stable long-term parents. Let me ask you a last question, if I might. You served as vice chair of the American Bar Association's Legislative and Lobbying Committee and their Constitutional Law and Separation of Powers committees. You've dedicated a fair amount of time to ABA activities. Do you believe the ABA does important work, and do you believe it is a needlessly partisan organization or one of the premier organizations representing the bar nationally?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I have been a member of the ABA. I want to agree with Senator Cornyn that there are certainly things that the ABA does that I appreciate, that Senator Cornyn appreciates. I can't speak to all the tasks and responsibilities that the association takes on. I know it's a subject of controversy, and I certainly wouldn't want to wade into any political issues as a pending nominee.
But you found that it did important work in your time and your service with the ABA.
I enjoyed the issues that I worked on, yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Ho. Thank you, Justice Willett.